What is something you have heard about the US which you felt was fake but is actually 100% true? Massive cars. We got a lift from our hotel to the airport in Austin from a hotel manager who, I think, just wanted a break and to make a few bucks. I felt like I was talking to him for the next county because of how colossal this truck was. He was a nice bloke though. It was an easy $100 for him for helping us out of a bind. He didn't ask for the 100, we just chose to give that to him. We were stuck in town and needed to get to the airport quickly, and the next Uber was estimating an hour before they were free. He stepped up to do us a favor when he really didn't have to and didn't ask for anything. Story 2. My mom had cataracts and a partially detached retina. She's also diabetic, so her health insurance covers anything to do with her eye health. She went to a doctor, she got an exam in the office, they scheduled the procedure at a facility she's been to before that was covered, and had the procedures done. She got a bill, $5,000 per eye. The doctor and her insurance went round and round for months. Turns out her insurance covered the doctor, covered the facility, and covered all the personnel in said facility, except they didn't cover the doctor in that facility, only within his own office. She's on Medicare, which is funded by the government. It isn't even private healthcare. Story 3. I always felt that MAGA was fake. I've known people from across the political spectrum. I have right-wing friends and left-wing friends, but none of them ever struck me as being so out of touch with reality. I mean, my right-wing friends have ideals and they seem to believe in them. They want lower taxation because they believe the individual is better at judging how best to spend what is ultimately their money. I get that. They believe the government is less efficient at certain services than a private corporation would be due to the profit incentive supposedly forcing them to improve in a way a government monopoly wouldn't. I get that too. They believe in a self-regulating free market over a government-controlled one. I get that as well. I don't necessarily agree with all of their talking points, but they make sense given their ideological persuasions. But MAGA? There doesn't seem to be any consistent values, no real ideals, and no real plan for how the country is going to be better. They all seem to collectively do a 180-degree turn on any issue if their leader does. They seem to believe and fight for whatever Trump said last with no real ideological conviction of any kind, perfectly capable of holding multiple contradictory stances at once. They warp reality around what they want it to be, deciding what is true and what isn't based on quote-unquote vibes. There doesn't seem to be any genuine desire to make the country a better place. It's cult-like in a way that just seems so unreal, like something out of fiction. Story 4. As a Canadian student surrounded by generally well-off American students at a private medical school, I thought it was a collective let's prank the Canuck when they all told me they don't have medical insurance and have to pay for coverage. Later in clinical rotations at the hospital, we students were allowed to learn hands-on only on the Medicaid patients but could only observe on privately insured or private pay patients. This was in one of the most liberal states in the Union. About a decade later, I had married an American and moved to another very liberal state. She had a medical emergency and tried to convince me to let her sleep it off because her copay, despite being fully insured through her full-time job, was $300 USD per ER visit. I practically carried her to the car and drove her to the hospital where she was given emergency treatment. During her treatment, unbeknownst to either of us, one of the several doctors who treated her was not in-network to her insurance despite everyone else and the hospital itself being so. After her recovery, we had to fight the hospital and her insurance company to cover that doctor's bill because she never consented to being treated by an out-of-network provider. The only reason I knew that was illegal was because I was a doc myself and was savvy to these sorts of laws by that time, and the hospital backed down. A couple of years after this, I finally came to my senses, got my wife her PR and the children their Canadian citizenship certificates, and we fled the USA for Canada. Story 5. Almost everything is related to healthcare and education. As someone born in a socialist country and who lived there during post-socialist times, my mind will never fully process just how expensive universities and healthcare are in the US. It just does not compute. I have seen US itemized hospital bills in real life. I've held them in my hands and yet they felt fake. My American friends wanted to see my reaction, so they showed some to me. It's not even just the bills themselves that I cannot process, but the fact that people actually pay them. They are clearly a ripoff. There is no way that the same exact care in Norway or Switzerland is incomparably cheaper. No way. So yeah, I'm still in denial about your healthcare costs. Story 6. The US used to be such a high-trust society that people would leave their doors unlocked when they weren't home and leave their keys in the cars in case a neighbor needed to use them. If you needed a job done, you could shake hands on it and the person would actually do the job as requested. When you wanted to pay someone, you could give them a piece of paper with your name and bank information as payment and they would trust you. Kids brought their guns and knives to school and didn't harm anyone. When you got gas, you pumped the gas first and then went inside to pay. Products sat on the shelves without needing to be sealed in 3 different ways for fear of tampering or kept behind glass for fear of theft. Story 7. Project MKUltra. The idea that there were government agents literally taking random Americans off the street because they didn't think they would be missed or believed if they claimed they were abducted is wild enough, but then add in that the purpose was to complete mind control experiments. If you had never heard of it, you'd think it was a story from your intoxicated uncle, but it has been verified and confirmed by the US government. It's the same thing with the Snowden revelations. Do not trust your government, kids. Story 8. Some women get 20 years in prison for nothing, while the men who actually committed the crime get a maximum of 2 years. The judges saw existing as a mother, even if they were physically far away at the time of the crime, as the worst crime. One mom was at a meeting signing for a secret apartment so she could leave her husband for good with the kids. While she was there, he hurt the child, she got 20 years, and the guy got about 2 years. For the failure to protect, she was sentenced even though she was literally in the middle of getting a secret apartment for protection. Another woman was trafficked by her husband, and after giving birth, she was thrown out onto the street while he kept the baby. He later accidentally ended the baby by rolling onto it while sleeping. He got 1.5 years for the baby's passing and 0 for trafficking her. She got 20 years. He had thrown her out, and she was homeless when the baby passed away. It's completely insane. I couldn't believe it until I watched the documentary. I had to stop it because it was so freaking sad. The judges just seem to hate black women and poor white women. Story 9. There are towns where people of color are not welcome and even are threatened or hurt for overstaying their welcome. To be honest, I watched Get Out and thought it was a great movie, but not believable at all as a plot. Then I think I watched a documentary or the news and they talked about black people being chased out of some places in this day and age because of sundown time, so I asked a friend from the US about it. She told me that one time she was on a road trip with a Latino friend and he went into a town to ask for directions. By the way, people were looking at him, the lack of anyone with a drop of melanin and how rude people were being. She was already scared. But what made it worse was that one of the older men approached them because the Latino friend wasn't getting it and told them that if they were still there by sundown, he was going to get shot. They left instantly after that. I'm South American, so I really don't understand how so many people from here in Africa willingly move to the States. I say willingly, not taken. It sounds like a horrible place to live. Story 10. I know dunking on American healthcare is cliche now, but back in 2010 when I tried to migrate, I thought folks were saying, "You will get no healthcare," just to scare me from going to the USA. On my second freaking day in the US, I developed one pesky sore throat. Where I'm from, even if you're not registered in the National Health Service, you could get a checkup and medicine in a private practice as a walk-in for no more than $50 at the time. I thought there was no way the US didn't have a similar system to frickin' Mexico. Well, you know how it is. When I called my dad, who had been living in the States for 8 years at that point, asking what I could do about it or where I should go, he just laughed and replied, "You should gargle some hot water with salt. There's no way I'm spending $500 on a sore throat." Obviously, I didn't last long there. Story 11. That anyone can achieve success. I am the son of a single mom. I was neglected from birth until age 12. I have 3 siblings. In my lifetime, I have been the recipient of government benefits and programs like food stamps, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, etc. My mom put herself through college while working multiple part-time jobs. Our church was the community that supported us emotionally and physically through our darkest times. I joined the Army in the mid-90s. I got some college money, experience, and certifications. I learned a lot about how the world works and was surrounded by friends of every color, creed, and ethnicity. Many of them were set on changing their stars. Most of them have done it. I made my bones, I got married, I had kids and bought a house, we moved and I bought again. I bought my first brand new car. I turned 50 this year. In 50 years, I went from poor to upper middle class. From SNAP benefits to ordering dinner for our Christmas family get-together and not worrying about the cost. From Section 8 to homeowner. I don't have a college degree and I don't have hundreds of thousands in debt. I live modestly with my wife and have more than enough to be comfortable and bless the lives of my family and community. Here are the true principles I found. Use government programs. It takes work and hustle, but they can keep you alive while you build yourself up. Work hard. I can learn or teach a skill, but I can't teach work ethic. If you're willing to work hard, the opportunities will come. Be a believer. Choose to be part of a community that builds up character, love, and families. I am a proud member of a church that supports me and where I can support others. Avoid debt. Go into debt for a house, for education with an ROI, or for reliable transportation. Avoid all other debt. A new phone with a loan? Nope. A credit card? Nope. Not until I can pay it off every month. Free money from an app? Nope. It's a trick. Build something. If you don't have a goal or a purpose, you won't be capable of sacrificing today's want for tomorrow's need. Story 12. I know I'm going to get downvoted to oblivion, but I'm amazed that pretty much the whole US believes that everyone having guns and the ability to defend themselves all the time makes it alright to use it to end people. Just replace conventional bullet-firing guns with electroguns or tasers directed by lasers. Charge a sizable amount, say $50, to recharge the battery and issue fines for doing it yourself. Income for the government. Charge, say, a $5,000 fine for incorrect use if you tase someone without cause. Make them all phone home via 5G, Wi-Fi, or Bluetooth with stats and impose huge fines for disabling the feature. More revenue. There would be way fewer accidents and a lot more direct income for the government. Story 13. All the guns and idiots with guns. I have never seen a gun in real life, not counting the pistols police carry in Canada except for 2 times. Once when a bunch of cops surrounded a car by me while driving that was recently involved in a shooting, and once when my dealer friend casually pulled out a pistol and a fat stack of crisp 20s and 50s, probably $50,000 worth. by Seattle for a soccer tournament, and all of a sudden there are tons of police and SWAT surrounding our hotel and the restaurant attached to it. See a guy taken out in cuffs after a bit. Turns out the guy tried smoking in the restaurant. He was told to put it out and go outside 10 feet from the door. He got mad over it, pulled a pistol, and shot into the roof. Turns out the dude had a legal pistol, an illegal sawing off down his freaking pant leg, and an illegal rifle in his truck. All over being told to please go outside to smoke. This was like in 2010. One of a couple of experiences seeing and being near U.S. citizens with guns that they really shouldn't have been allowed to have, when legal guns, of course. Story 14. The U.S. does not have an official language at the federal level. Official languages are determined at the state level. Right now, 31 states have an official language, as well as 4 out of the 6 U.S. territories. All of them have English as an official language. However, Alaska also has the Alaskan Native Languages as official languages. Hawaii also has Hawaiian as an official language. French has a special status in Louisiana. Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands also have Chamorro as an official language. Carolinian is also an official language of the Northern Mariana Islands. Puerto Rico also has Spanish as an official language. American Samoa also has Samoan as an official language. The U.S. has the 5th largest Spanish-speaking population in the world, partially aided by Puerto Rico, where the majority of residents speak Spanish. The top 4 are Mexico, Spain, Colombia, and Argentina. NYC is the most linguistically diverse city in the world. Approximately 800 languages are spoken in the 5 boroughs. This total includes some lost languages that are no longer commonly spoken outside of NYC. Let me be clear on something, however. The U.S. is not the most linguistically diverse country in the world. Story 15. The state of Washington is known for being super rainy, think Forks, Seattle, etc., but as soon as you cross the Cascade Mountain Range into the east 2/3 of the state, it is literally a desert. Think water shortages and farm irrigation water rights. This is because of the rain shadow, which basically means all the precipitation clouds coming from the coast, Pacific Ocean, get caught by the mountains and don't make it over the pass to the east side. Even cooler is there is a city in the very northwest part of the state, near Forks, the rainiest city in the country, that has its own mountain creating a personal rain shadow for them called Sequim, and they get something like 350 days of sunshine each year. Story 16. The Revolutionary War was extraordinary. First off, America was not just a ragtag band of marksmen. In the North, there were hunters from Pennsylvania and Maryland who decided, we're going to hunt redcoats now. And these men walked their respective states to Boston in record time on foot, with the only injury being a single twisted ankle. This was at a time when the East Coast was still covered in deep Appalachian woods. They arrived in Boston while the city was essentially under siege by the Americans. The British were occupying the city and wouldn't let anyone come or go. All their supplies were coming in by sea. These hunters would just chill and take pot shots at the redcoats to the point where the guards stopped looking over the walls for fear of being shot. Eventually, since America was short on ammunition, Washington had to say, yo, chill, we need to save that. Now, let's take it back a bit before our hunters appeared. One day, the British decided, let's go steal some American ammo. It's at Concord. The officers were all for it, thinking, let's end this. I want to see my lads and lasses back home in the Isles. They decided to sneak up on them, so they headed out at night. Then Paul Revere and some other guys set out to spread the word because their only job was to alert people if the British moved. So Paulie and his homies, right, a doctor and some guy they stopped on the street and told, you've got to help us, set out to spread the news. They went every which way to tell people that the British were heading to Concord. One of them came galloping into Lexington, yelling at the top of his lungs at 4 a.m. that the British are coming. Except he forgot to mention they were still about 20 miles away. The militia hung out for an hour, then said, forget this, let's get a drink, and headed to the bar. Hours passed, and finally the British were spotted, and the now inebriated troops were rallied. There were about 77 militiamen and nearly 700 redcoats. The militia lined up and the British lined up, realizing they were woefully outnumbered. One guy basically said, I'm going home. Their leader, John Parker, reportedly said something to the effect of, stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. No one knows who shot first, but the militia scattered after the first volley, except for a few who stayed to fight. Then the British went to Concord, got pushed back, and started to retreat. Remember, those horsemen had been spreading the word since 3 a.m. By the time the British retreated, men were coming from far and wide to join the fight. For the entire walk back to Boston, the British were being sniped at by Yankees appearing from everywhere. The records suggest that thousands of shots were fired that day, and while the British suffered about 273 total casualties, including terminated, wounded, and missing, the sheer number of missed shots just shows how chaotic black powder warfare really was. Story 17. I haven't seen by far the most mind-blowing fact. Heavily influenced by the British rule of law and Enlightenment thinkers, the United States was the first democratic republic with free citizens since the small city-state of Athens about 2,200 years earlier. It was arguably only the second such nation in recorded history. In a historically short 238 years, there are now at least 88 free democracies. Over half of the world now lives in a free democracy. In a once powerful and rapidly growing competing system, communism has virtually been eliminated on Earth. Story 18. There's a common misconception with regard to the original division between church and state. The First Amendment and earlier Supreme Court interpretations of the Constitution were not meant to separate the two in the way that you and I think of today. Localities and municipalities with deeply integrated religious institutions were very common throughout the first century of the United States. The will for separate church and state was originally intended to simply impede the federal government from sponsoring or adopting one federal religion. Local governments were pretty much free to impose religious laws and ties as they wished. Story 19. In the first U.S. Census, 1790, it was determined that there were 4 million people in the country. 620,000 of them were enslaved African Americans. By the end of the Civil War in 1865, the 13th Amendment freed around 4 million enslaved people, following a conflict that resulted in an estimated 620,000 casualties. The Civil War was almost an inevitability. It was as if it was a payment for the son that should have been eradicated back when the nation was born. A nation conceived in liberty with slavery still a part of its culture was doomed to have a reckoning to end the slave system, or it would end the nation itself. So apparently, President Lincoln's words in his second inaugural address proved prophetic, that the suffering inflicted would be answered by an equal cost before the war could end. Makes one think that there is a sort of poetic justice in the universe. Story 20. Wilmer McLean was a landowner in Manassas, Virginia in 1861. The first Battle of Bull Run occurred on his farm. He moved away from Northern Virginia to get away from what became the Civil War. A Union cannonball apparently fell through his fireplace and ruined a Confederate brigadier general's dinner. He moved to a nice little spot about 200 clicks south, a town called Appomattox Courthouse. General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in his house, and both Confederate and Union soldiers stole furniture from the residents upon leaving. Of this, he supposedly said, "The war began in my front yard and ended in my front parlor." Story 21. For me, it's just the simple fact that an unruly mob beat down the government and then established the Constitution. Something else neat is that after the government realized subsidizing only one company in an industry was a bad idea, they tried subsidizing 2 railroad companies to get tracks across America. This backfired because the companies were paid by how much track was laid. Consequently, the companies would use taxpayer dollars to blow up each other's tracks to get more money than the other company. Tracks paid for by taxes were being blown up by dynamite, also paid for by taxes. I think subsidizing just doesn't work. Just look at modern-day Comcast. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 22. I can drive 3,000 miles, about 4,828 kilometers in any direction, and never meet anyone I can't speak with in my native tongue or drive into the ocean. In that journey, I can relate to those I meet by swapping stories and talking about shared experiences regarding a single sport, football, not football, aka soccer. Of course, I need to drive everywhere because where I'm going is always over 20 miles, 32 kilometers away, even just grabbing a bite to eat. Speaking of eating, I can't eat my same favorite meal every day with every stop in my favorite restaurant. That being said, there are regional differences, all of which can be enjoyed usually in food or drink form. When in the southeastern states, enjoy the sweet tea, as opposed to northeast, the unsweetened iced tea, barbecue, ribs, grits, cornbread, etc. The North Central has excellent cheeses, beer, and sausages. The Southwest, Tex-Mex, is great for spicy foods, and the West Coast is for everything else being available, as well as cuisine from anywhere. To boil down our country, from Northeast to Southeast to Midwest to Southwest to Left Coast, chicken wings and craft beer to sweet tea and hominy to cheddar curds and gravy to salsa and barbecue, and finally to anything and everything. Sorry if this seems so food-centric, I'm a bit peckish. Story 23. Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate Army general, lost his arm during the Civil War. It has its own grave now. The conflict in Kansas and the events in Ferguson are similar in that both incidents involved individuals who were too busy looting to care. When American and English delegates sat to have a portrait painted after they negotiated the end of the Revolutionary War, the British were so sour they refused to pose. As a result, we got a lovely portrait of only our delegation. The USS Constitution, which was used in the War of 1812, is still around today, over 200 years later. Before the Civil War, the American Colonization Society relocated formerly enslaved people back to Africa and established countries like Liberia. Samuel Slater, the man who built the first factory in America, completely memorized the designs in Britain, returned and built one from scratch. William Henry Harrison gave an exceptionally long inaugural address, then passed away after serving only 1 month in office. At the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson led a small force of Americans to a massive victory over a large British army. Unfortunately, it was fought 2 weeks after the peace treaty had already been signed. On a similar note, England removed some of the acts that enraged the American colonists, but by the time the news reached America, we had already declared independence. Story 24. Just prior to World War II, the United States created the Civil Air Patrol, CAP, a volunteer organization that was, at the time, dedicated to protecting the United States from German submarines. CAP is, however, an entirely civilian organization and didn't have access to military-grade planes. Consequently, the pilots would fly small civilian planes over the coast, and if they spotted a submarine, they would attempt a bombing run. But since they weren't using actual bombers, a CAP bombing run consisted of the pilot taking an armed bomb, which he kept under his seat between his legs and the second seat of the plane, or anywhere else easily within reach, and attempting to manually drop it onto the surface sub. For anyone who has ever tried to hit a target by dropping something out of a moving plane over the ocean, this is extremely difficult to do, yet CAP hit 10 subs and sank 2 of them. Many CAP members claim that a third was sunk, but the United States government maintains that this legendary third termination was actually a whale. Story 25. For 40 years, 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service studied the effects and transmission of syphilis among African American men without telling them what they were doing and without treating any of the subjects for the disease. The experiment was terminated in 1972 after a leak to the press revealed its existence. For 40 years, through 7 U.S. presidents and dozens of public health directors, men whose disease could have been cured with readily available penicillin were left untreated. Researchers, including some African American physicians and researchers at the Tuskegee Institute, continued the study so they could observe how syphilis affected men, women, and children, including those born with congenital syphilis. I first heard about this in the early 1990s when an African American man I worked with used it as an example of the oppression of black men by white society. I disbelieved him and thought he was making it up to justify his anger. Then I found out he was right. 40 years. Story 26. The biggest, mind-blowing fact for me would have to be MK Ultra. The government literally kidnapped people and forced agents of various government branches, military servicemen, and both educated and uneducated civilians to take mind-altering substances. The CIA then performed experiments on them while they were under the influence. Most of the files on MK Ultra were destroyed in 1973 by the then CIA director Richard Helms. However, some information survived, and what we know is that the CIA attempted to achieve mind control and force people to do things they would otherwise never do. Considering the secrecy of the project, some believe that the CIA was attempting to program innocent people to commit inhuman acts at the touch of a button or the sound of a verbal command. Story 27. The public education system is not that bad if you aren't black or Hispanic. Underperforming in U.S. schools is mostly due to poverty and racism. Asian Americans average a PISA score of 548, better than every single country in the world except for Singapore. Non-Hispanic white Americans average a PISA score of 518, better than most European countries and tied with Netherlands and Switzerland. Even including all races, the average PISA score is better than all countries like Sweden, Iceland, Spain, and Italy. P.S. I'm not white or Asian, just pointing out that it's unfair to compare a multi-ethnic, economically divided country like the United States with more homogeneous countries like Finland, 98% white, or Japan, 99% Asian. This is important because it's harder to discriminate against a group of people if you can't identify what group they belong to based on appearance alone. I don't know how to account for Singapore, though. Also, the United States is probably more diverse than where you live. Even places like Canada and the UK, which are considered multi-ethnic, have a lot less diversity than the USA. Canada, 83% white, UK, 82% white, the US, 63% non-Hispanic white, 72% if Hispanic whites are included. Story 28. I'm from Texas, but I've lived and spent time in the Northeast, the Midwest, and Europe. These are the things that surprise people. Texas is one of the most diverse states in the nation. For example, people commonly assume Texas is very conservative, rural, and white, when it's actually fairly purple, has large urban populations, and represents many ethnicities and cultures. Some people are surprised to learn that Houston is almost as large population-wise as Chicago, and that Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio are among the largest cities in the U.S. Most Texans don't have thick accents. If I had a nickel for every Minnesotan who said, "You can't be from Texas, you sound normal," I'd have, I don't know, like $1 or something. Only the most rural areas really have thick accents. Texas isn't really culturally part of the South. The region from Louisiana through Texas forms a kind of cultural gradient between the South and the Southwest. A noteworthy amount of Texans want to secede. This is actually very rare. It's more of a meme. Texas has several varieties of barbecue. It's not just smoked brisket. There are also varieties of barbacoa and direct flame grilling. What is true? Texans are willing to fight about barbecue and smoking. It's hot as hell. There are many rural populations that own horses, even if most people don't. Texans are very proud of Texas. Story 29. Michigander here, I know about lakes. Number of lakes. You know how Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes, they say? They actually have around 11,800, depending on how you count them, but definitely a little over 10K. Michigan has 11,000, including the Great Lakes, so we have more freshwater shoreline. Wisconsin has over 15,000, plus a couple of Great Lakes shorelines. Why the actual heck is Wisconsin not the land of 15,000 lakes? I guess it's less catchy? Cheeseheads, anyway. I actually adore you guys and think our state rivalry is stupid as long as you agree we're cooler than Ohio. Also a joke. Michigan's lakes. Michigan touches 4 of the 5 Great Lakes: Huron, Superior, Michigan, and Erie. Lake Ontario is further east but connects to Erie. Lake Superior, my happy place, my darling queen, the shoulder I cry on, and my savior when I was at my lowest. Lake Superior is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful freshwater oceans in the world. She really does feel like an ocean, too. You can get out there and see nothing for miles. She is dangerous, she is fickle, and she is dangerous again. She contains 350 known shipwrecks. The Great Lakes as a whole contain over 10,000 wrecks. So while she is the scariest, she is not technically the most dangerous. But there is a common phrase, thanks to a song about her, that she never gives up on her. This is because the water is so cold it prevents the bacteria that causes bodies to float from growing, and shipwrecks are sometimes so hard to find far from shore. Look up the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Jordan Lightfoot and really listen to the lyrics. She is known to the local Great Lakes native folks as Gichigami. Spelling differs by group. I studied a bit of the local dialect in college at Marquette MI on the Superior Shore in the Upper Peninsula, which quite literally means Great Lake or Big Water. She is clear and gorgeous, deep as hell itself, and you'd best heed her warning when the wind rises and the waves batter the rocks. It is alarmingly similar to storms at the seashore, and we have a billion lighthouses for that very reason. Story 30. California has microclimates because it has a diverse ecosystem, meaning you can drive an hour from north to San Francisco and go from foggy and rainy to hot and dry. SoCal is basically in the desert area of the state, that's why it's hot as heck there year-round. The rest of us have at least 2 to 4 seasons, which include heavy snow for those in the mountains. A favorite pastime of mine has always been going down to the river and walking through the forest. Yes, we actually have rivers and natural lakes. Story 31. New Mexico is at the heart of almost every legitimate conspiracy. For the most part, New Mexico is a desolate landscape with high poverty rates where half the state grows either beans or green chilies. New Mexico has its own style of Mexican food that is arguably superior to the original. La Cosa Nostra, the mafia, reportedly uses many Albuquerque businesses to launder money by selling food there, largely because there isn't a tax on groceries and many government agencies are understaffed. Albuquerque remains one of the most dangerous cities in the country. New Mexico's border with Mexico is one of the busiest for illegal immigration, which is unsurprising considering that New Mexico is often seen as a test kitchen for liberal and democratic policies. Santa Fe, New Mexico is an art mecca where some believe secret societies of artists engage in ritualistic gatherings to express their feelings. Mountain Air, New Mexico, a desolate place, is the pinto bean capital of the world. Also located in Mountain Air is a NASA research area and several bombing ranges used for experimental weapons testing. Jeffrey Epstein allegedly used his ranch in New Mexico to facilitate his activities with the help of high-profile figures. The first atomic bomb was detonated in the desert at White Sands, New Mexico. Family friends who lived nearby said it was like the sun was rising again, and may they all rest in peace. Finally, Billy the Kid was taken down there. Story 32. I'm from Idaho. We're known for potatoes. And rightly so. If you've eaten a McDonald's French fry ever in your life, it most likely came from Idaho. Some Idaho golden potatoes are grown in Oregon now, though, but the majority of those potatoes are grown for McDonald's Corp. But for a fun, interesting fact about Idaho, it's actually a wonderful place to live, even living in the most populated area of the state, Boise Valley. You're within an hour's drive of places that rarely see humans. We get all 4 distinct seasons, and the natural wild areas of the state are beautiful during all of them. And amazingly, with all of that natural beauty around us and the modern conveniences of the populated areas, we get enough culture as well, all without any real looming threats of natural disasters. We don't get regular mudslides, tornadoes, hurricanes, obviously, and even our snowfall is usually fairly moderate. Story 33. Pennsylvania stuff. The first colonists here were the Quakers, who were what today I would call based. They welcome anyone and everyone, and I mean anyone and everyone. State is named after the guy who owned the land. Coal strikes in Scranton nearly shut down the country when they happened. Philadelphia is the first official U.S. city. Hershey is actually a city in PA, which does include the Hershey Park. Penn State is also a city, state college. I forgot the exact number, but it's illegal for women to live in the same house together, for it is considered an intimate hotel at that point. This law is part of blue laws enacted during the mid-late 1800s. Essentially laws created by political machines that made no sense at all. The entirety of the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border is the Delaware River. The state is surprisingly wide, with it taking between 5 to 8 hours end to end to travel through by car. The battle for Gettysburg only occurred because Lee's men needed some boots, which Gettysburg made. The Philadelphia elite were wealthy British officials and bachelorettes, one of which Benedict Arnold married, building on to the pile of social exile he was beginning to get. Revolutionary War stuff for the uneducated. Old Forge is technically considered the pizza capital of the world or something like that. The Susquehanna River is aptly named after the Susquehanna tribe of Pennsylvania. We have bald eagles. There's probably others, but I'm forgetting them. Story 34. The only state with a date December 7th on its state flag. Bob Marley lived and worked here for several years. He was a forklift driver at a Chrysler assembly plant, which stood a mile from my house. If you go to Jamaica and tell you're from here, you get lots of love because they all know the story. The lowest lying state for average sea level, the only state without a real national park that did something a few years ago, but it was forced. Manufactured most of the gunpowder used by the Union in the Civil War. Only state with a curved arc border other than the state on the other side. Story 35. The state beverage of New York is milk. There's also the fact that New York is much larger than just NYC. I think the NYC population is around 8 million, while New York State's total population is roughly 19.5 million. My numbers might be a bit updated, but the point stands. There is a ton to do in upstate New York. The Finger Lakes were carved by massive glaciers as they moved across the land. The entire area has very fertile soil and is excellent for growing grapes. So the larger lakes are home to tons of wineries. Ithaca, New York is an absolutely gorgeous place to live. I'd recommend it to any couple for a romantic getaway. Honestly though, don't just stick to the big cities. Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse all have their charms, but they can be a bit sketchy in parts. While they have nice areas, the rough areas are quite intense. If you're coming to this region, you should hike, kayak, and hit up any small town festivals. They're always a blast and they always have great wine. Story 36. Saying I am from Tennessee just does not feel like enough to clarify where I'm from. It's one of those states that varies so vastly. In school, we even learn about the 3 grand divisions of the state, represented by the 3 stars on our state flag. Memphis, where I've lived my whole life, is nothing like East Tennessee. East Tennessee is mountainous, while West Tennessee is flat. When I visited East Tennessee or even Middle Tennessee, they feel like completely different worlds from West Tennessee. It's as good as visiting another state. Culturally and politically, Memphis feels like an entirely different state sometimes. Also, Tennessee is a dry state by default, and it's up to the individual counties to determine their own liquor laws. Moore County, where Jack Daniels is made, is a dry county, though there are now laws allowing sales in the Jack Daniels gift shop and sampling at the distillery. Story 37. The Florida man stereotype is almost entirely attributable to the government in the Sunshine Act of 1967 and the subsequent 1976 Sunshine Amendment, which requires that, quote, every portion of every meeting of an agency shall be open to public observation. This means that Florida has one of the most open state governments in the U.S. where nearly everything is public record except for the following: information relating to national defense, information related solely to internal personnel rules and practices, matters specifically protected by law, trade secrets or privileged confidential commercial information, matters censuring or accusing a person of a crime, information where disclosure would constitute a breach of privacy, investigatory records where disclosure would harm the proceedings, information used by an agency responsible for the regulation of financial institutions, information that would lead to financial speculation or endanger the stability of financial institution, information related to the agency's participation in legal proceedings, and all of this makes it much harder for any government agent to act in the shadows. This has led to a majority of arrest documents being open record by default, which makes it much easier for reporters and social media to track down outrageous crimes. It's disappointing to see my state take flack for having crazy people when it's only because of such progressive laws that the public can see these incidents in the first place. Story 38. Some facts about Washington State. It is technically illegal to terminate Bigfoot. It is known as the Undiscovered Species Protection Act, originally passed in Skamania County. We are the only state, to my knowledge, that has whale hunting grounds specifically pertaining to the treaty rights of the Maka tribe. Besides Boeing, Microsoft, and Amazon, Washington is also responsible for Costco, Darigold, and White Pages. Trees at lower elevations are usually not old growth. Many you see are actually between 20 and 80 years old. Washington State has 2 major mountain ranges, the Cascades and the Olympics, the sea, a ford, a Hood Canal, and a desert. Some famous people from here include Adam West, Kenny Loggins, Gary Larson, Bing Crosby, Anthony Ray, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Craig Bartlett, Chuck Jones, Tom McGrath, and Linda Emery. Puget Sound actually has a detectable caffeine content. We have a chunk of Canada because of a border dispute, Point Roberts. We know you're a Californian when you come out in shorts and a snow jacket. A common colloquialism is the mountains are out today. Story 39. What is now Michigan was once part of Virginia. Early definitions of Virginia were basically just a line drawn from the southern state line all the way to the Mississippi River, then up to the territory now known as Canada and back over to the western border of Pennsylvania or maybe Ohio. That early map of Virginia is insane. Also, most of the county forgets that the first English colony was established in Virginia 14 years before the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts. By 1619, Virginia had established a legislative body and done a bunch of other things. Someone stated the other day that the Virginia town of Jamestown was abandoned in 1699. It's kinda irrelevant. The banks of the James River were prone to flooding, so they moved miles upland and created Williamsburg. Story 40. Utah is home to the fairly well-known LDS Church. Many people here are at least slightly aware of the LDS Church, although they are probably not incredibly familiar with its doctrine or history. What most people aren't aware of is the small group of radicals who broke off from the LDS Church and set up shop in southern Utah and northern Arizona, though they've been mostly cleaned out of Arizona by now, my home region. This cult is what people with only a passing understanding of the LDS Church probably think of when they imagine Mormons. The homemade prairie dresses, the corduroys with button-down shirts, the really weird way of speaking that's simultaneously holier-than-thou and hillbilly, and the polygamy. They aren't standard LDS, although there are still many problems with the mainline LDS Church. They're a radical subcult with similar but different beliefs and traditions. Story 41. New Jersey is more than just the Meadowlands. There is a park in Newark with more and better cherry blossoms than DC, and fewer crowds. We are a historical crossroads for the U.S. and now for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. Our ports are one of the major gateways to the U.S. on the eastern seaboard. There are many hidden historical sites from the Revolutionary War to Victorian towns, and the homes of some of the most important modern inventions since the Industrial Revolution. The whole state is classified as metropolitan, being sandwiched between NYC and Philadelphia, plus larger satellite urban areas in and immediately outside the state. Despite that, there is a lot of scenic countryside and green space. We're called the Garden State for a reason. And we drive really fast here. We're a really pretty state, from the skyscraper-lined urban waterfronts to cliffs and waterfalls, beautiful coastlines and beaches to scenic mountains, valleys, and farmland in the highlands. Well, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.